Are we a go? Hello. It's happening. Are we streaming now? Yeah, good. Just double checking. I've been given a thumbs up with a mask covering actual facial expression. Hi, welcome to Did You Hear the One About the End of the World? Live from COP26. I'm Gemma Cairney, and hello to our audience. I know that a load of you are watching back home or perhaps procrastinating at work. Come on. We're here to talk about the serious and also the more gigglesome. And obviously our live audience, live here in Glasgow. Thanks for joining us. It's still such a thrill to see twinkling eyes. Real ones, not glitching ones. Today we'll be talking about the role that comedy takes in our consumption, let's say, and tackling global warming. I'm very glad that I'm speaking to some of the experts and funny people that I am. We'll be asking, can climate change actually be funny? I'm very intrigued to see from the audience, there's a kind of frivolity in the air, which makes me think that we all are here because we believe it perhaps can be funny. Just to really get our heads around this, I want to play a clip before I introduce to you the panel that was filmed here at COP26 by a very, very famous Scottish comedian that goes by the name of Frankie Boyle. Should we play it?
Hello and welcome to New World Order from Glasgow, where people have started to notice that the COP26 climate conference is happening because roads have started to close. Now the only legal way to travel around Glasgow is to form an orange walk. I hope that Greta Thunberg comes to Glasgow, has a look around and decides that the world isn't worth saving. Next week she's on Top Gear. If anything's going to be achieved at this conference, it's going to depend on mutual trust. And it's been held in a city where 60% of the chip shop salt shakers are chained to the counter. There's going to be climate protests, and good luck to those people. But I worry that in Glasgow, it's going to be difficult to tell who's a protester and who isn't. Has someone glued themselves to the road? Or were they sniffing glue and fell over?
So does comedy help broadcasters and scientists alike reach audiences who might not normally choose to engage with the subject of environmentally friendly topics and sustainability? What role does comedy have in helping us navigate the enormous challenge, and actually quite a serious one, that is climate change? Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce my panel, a comedian, an environmental researcher who performs live climate change comedy, would you believe? His upcoming book, Hot Mess, is published this month by Headline. He has appeared on various BBC Radio 4 shows, was the environment correspondent on Unspun with Matt Ford for Dave, and The State of It for BBC Scotland. He's a former finalist in the new BBC Comedy Awards. He has a PhD in climate change policy and is an active researcher at University College London in the Institute for Sustainable Resources, whatever that means. It is Dr. Matt Winning.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very well. Lovely to be here. Just hearing that list of things back to me is the first time that I've been like, that is quite a confusing list of things for one person to do. But lovely.
How long ago were you in the BBC New Comedy Award?
Oh, quite a while ago, 2012. You were the judge on the semi-final.
That's right, yes, but I thought everyone did well, never mind.
Okay, moving on. As a performer, he's toured internationally and has made multiple appearances on some of Britain's most popular TV and radio comedies, including Mock the Week, Have I Got News For You, Would I Lie To You, and Taskmaster. As a writer, he has written 7 novels, collaborated on a graphic novel, and published Crap at the Environment, a non-fiction book following his efforts to halve his carbon footprint. It's comedian and writer Mark Watson. Also quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah, toured internationally by boat, I should.
Did you? Was it by boat?
No.
Okay.
My carbon footprint of my career is an absolute eyesore.
Okay, we're going to go into that. And if you are at home and you are chomping at the bit to ask questions, then please do. There'll be an opportunity using the hashtag #AskComedians. Just simply that, all one word, hashtag #AskComedians. It will somehow magically appear on one of these many bits of information that I have around me, and I will ask the comedians at the end of my chat. Okay, talk about technical voodoo. We have got Maeve joining us digitally and virtually, a comedy writer, a performer who has multiple TV and radio credits, including on the Comedy Central series Inside Amy Schumer. As a presenter, she co-hosts the Climate Justice podcast, Mothers of Invention, with former Irish President Mary Robinson. She is also a co-host of Neil deGrasse Tyson, I hope I got that right, National Geographic series Star Talk. She's written several books as well, including Maeve in America, Essays by a Girl from Somewhere Else, and the forthcoming Tell Everyone on This Train, I Love Them, to be published in 2022 by Penguin USA. It's comedian and writer Maeve Higgins.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you? I'm so glad to be here. I was really annoyed that they didn't fly me over, but whatever.
Do you know what I found myself actually Googling yesterday, talking about getting from A to B and being somebody that has wanderlust and wants to be in places, was how long it would take to walk from Glasgow to London. And it takes 18 days. It's quite long. So,
is that like if you stop and have a drink as well? Or is that just you constantly, you're just walking?
It wasn't defined, but I'm hoping that there's a chance to stop and have a drink when I do it.
The way the trains were last week, you might have to get home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm desperate to introduce our final panellist, Jon. On TV, he is known best as the team captain of Channel 4's Cats Down Countdown and as the host of critically acclaimed Dave show, Ultimate Warrior. His wife, Lucy Beaumont, he also collaborates with. He writes and stars in the award-winning show, which is on Dave, Meet the Richardsons. Beyond his leading panel and sitcom roles, he's a prolific guest on many TV shows, including Have I Got News for You?, Live at the Apollo, Would I Lie to You?, and Taskmaster. How are you not all exhausted? I don't even know.
We are.
Yeah, he has hosted and guested on several podcasts and can currently be heard on a podcast series in which he takes his co-host through his daily worries from food to climate change. The podcast is called Jon Richardson and the Futurenauts, and it's called that because his name is, if you haven't guessed, Jon Richardson. Woo! All right, I'm going to hand it over to you guys now. But firstly, it would be nice to know where exactly our digital panel members are. Where are you, Maeve and Jon?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York. And that's not where I'm from. You can probably tell by my accent, I'm actually from Texas.
And
no, I'm Irish, but I live here now. Yeah, so delighted to be here. And I absolutely love Glasgow. And I've had some really touch and go shows at the stand there.
I'm actually just down the road, but I just couldn't be asked to come in.
That's the general vibe these days. It's allowed, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just don't really want to go, but I can still do it from my lounge. Okay, so I'm firstly going to come to you, Matt, because you've been here at COP26 for a few days, getting into the thick of it.
Yeah.
From your climate change, PhD, academic, clever sense of self. That's that side of you.
Yeah.
Are we progressing? Is something exciting happening at COP26 from a serious perspective?
From a serious perspective, so I'm not in the thick of it. I just want
Yes, you are.
The TV show specifically. Although it does feel a little bit like the thick of it.
It does.
I'm walking past ministers all the time who are sort of rushing about and a lot of bullshit happening at the same time. Sorry, I'm allowed to say. Anyway, but yeah, I've been there for the last 4 days now, and Monday was very much like nobody knows what's going to happen, and actually quite a lot's happened the last few days, and some people I was speaking to today have been saying, given the announcements that have happened in the last few days, things are looking more positive than some people expected. So we're, The headline is that we're obviously trying to aim to keep 1.5 alive. It's like the headline, which is like, we've already warmed the planet by about 1 degree. We're trying to not increase that by more than another half a degree, which is very difficult given that we're emitting more now than we've ever emitted in history. And we need to bring that down from record levels to nothing within the next 3 decades. But someone I was speaking to today that did some calculations late last night after I went for dinner with them, and they've been published, they're out there from the International Energy Agency today, stating that given the commitments that have happened at COP26, we've moved to something like maybe 1.8 degrees, which is, given that our previous pledges looked more like, I don't know, 2.7, somewhere around that before. Actually, the dial's moved quite a bit, and I know that all sounds like really small numbers, but they're actually very important numbers because it's millions of people being affected by those small changes in percentage of a degree. So that was very dry and dull. The
takeout is that there is hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So there, people say that it's the end of the world, and this is, and it would be if we did nothing. It really would be awful, but we are doing stuff. Stuff is happening, and there's millions of amazing different things happening that are slightly changing things slowly, but we need to change things even faster, and we need even more people changing things, is the main message. So yeah, there's absolutely hope, but I always like to think of it, or what I always say is that we're humans, so we'll never let the worst happen, but we'll also never try our absolute hardest. It's like we'll cram the day before an exam and make sure we kind of scrape by. And that's kind of what's been happening so far with climate change.
Mark, you're known for a lot of high-profile mainstream comedy stuff, but I didn't know that you are actually a veteran in this area. You wrote a book, right, in 2009 called Crap at the Environment.
Yeah.
What was that about? Tell me about the book.
It was an attempt to reverse climate change, but it's more than 10 years on now. It doesn't look like it did do it on its own. It was. I watched the Al Gore film, An Inconvenient Truth, it must have been 2007, 2008, and felt like most people that watched it, it'd be good to do something about it, I suppose. I launched, this is how long ago this was, if you want to put it into context. The campaign at the time was on MySpace, because even Facebook hadn't got its claws into civilization yet. And on what was then MySpace and became Facebook, I encouraged loads of people to do small stuff, like recycling, reducing air miles for food, all that kind of stuff you could do in your own life. And I got to, at the time I was invited to go on, Al Gore was training people to do climate lectures, versions of his talk. So I ended up doing a comedy version of An Inconvenient Truth, but still with the actual slides with the science, which I did for a couple of years. And all of this was sort of fine, but in a way I was part of the problem because I did a lot of really funny, but well, not really funny, I've never been really funny, as funny as I ever get, which is what we all know. Sort of second division comedy about which did it. That's as in old school football, so championship now, and it worked. It entertained audiences, and people did go away engaged with it up to a point, I think. But a lot of it was focused on tiny stuff, and I think we've seen over the past 10 years the agenda needs to. It's still important to do stuff in your own life, obviously, but maybe what's more important, clearly what's more important is campaigning for bigger systemic change. And there's a limit to how much of that you can do by doing jokes about it, I think. And that's why I've enjoyed Matt's work over the past few years, has actually fused comedy and climate change in a way that's really integral to it, whereas what I was doing was kind of dipping my toe in the water. So that, I think it encouraged other people who were also dipping their toes in. It was like a good beginner's step. But the trouble is, a lot of people 10 years ago did good beginner's steps. And as Matt said, we sort of didn't move on from that in a lot of ways because of this human instinct to think, well, I've done a lot of recycling this week. That'll do it, I suppose. And that's nobody's fault, really, but it is a worry. It's a problem with stand-up that it does touch on loads of subjects for a tiny bit of time, in not that much depth, which is fun if you're watching a stand-up show, but we do need to go into this subject in a fair bit of depth, I think.
I mean, it's a lot trendier now to talk about.
Oh, Matt's the coolest guy on the comedy scene. It's a lot more urgent now, definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
At the time I was doing it, it was kind of an unfashionable topic for entertainers. But again, that meant that I had to ramp up the funny as much as I could. But that in turn meant we got away from, the important stuff, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I probably at the exact same time would have been very, like, in my early-ish 20s and saw the same thing, like An Inconvenient Truth, and then went and did a PhD on climate change policy off the back of it. And
All right, mate.
Here
We've all got different skill
is,
sets.
Horses for courses.
Maeve,
I did get around to PhD in the end.
I would love to ask your input on this in terms of laughter and comedy being such an important vehicle and coping mechanism in current times. Does it help us actually come together and get some good stuff done in terms of humanity, or is it a distraction?
Yeah, I mean, it's so fun to be here with the lads, and I saw Mark's show back in the day, and it was cool. And like you said, it did make you feel like, well, I can do something about this, and it made you laugh, which I do think is important. You have a scientist there on the panel, and if you laugh, your mouth opens and information can go in. So the scientist can back me up on that. No, but like both of the lads there touched on, and then it's kind of like a human instinct to say like, oh, well, we tried or we did this. But I disagree with that. I think that really we've been operating under like huge pressure from like massive corporations and systems that we don't even see, that like make us think we're helpless and like make us think that we've tried and we failed and all we can do now is our recycling or whatever. All this focus on individual action, like Mark mentioned, is quite misplaced. So I think that one way that comedy can really help is in the old way that comedy used to work, which was being subversive. Because I think now comedy often just works with the status quo. And like what we end up doing is, we try to get rich and famous ourselves. And we try and like write shows about things that will, chime with the mainstream. And that's not going to help the climate, catastrophe. And like, I was thinking when that was all happening, like back in 2001, say, that was when Republican strategists here in the US decided to make a big effort not to use the term global warming. They were like, no, we'll say climate change. That doesn't sound as scary. And then it happened. And now we all do that too. So I think we have to understand that there are really big forces at work to keep like the climate crisis happening, and that is the fossil fuel industry and that is the banking industry. So it's trying to bear that in mind and not beat ourselves up, I think, and to also be more focused and more targeted. And I think too, like having fun is so important. And like on our podcast, it gets really serious and sad because all these climate crises are devastating. But sometimes the people that we talk to who are actually really the most in the middle of it are like the warmest, most fun, like coolest, most relaxed people. And like, I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't describe comedians that way. I'd say we're kind of like uptight and depressed. But I remember interviewing this one lady, and her name is Anne Polina. And she's a river protector in Australia. She's like an Indigenous woman and she protects the water on her ancestral land. And she's also an academic researcher and a midwife and all these other really overachieving things. But she was just such a laugh. Like she was just so fun and warm. And I think it's because she's taking action and she's part of the community. And also I think being an Indigenous person, Indigenous people have faced other existential crises, for many comedians, and we definitely skew white and we skew male, both in the UK and in the US.
I hadn't noticed.
Let me explain to you. So we have this one viewpoint, right? And it's not always the correct one, but we do have the mic. So it's important that we get it right.
Yeah, some really, really interesting comments there. Thank you so much, Maeve.
Yeah.
And I agree with a kind of political search for fun and for joy. And I see it all over the world, and I feel lucky to have travelled a lot as well, particularly to the places that are being described as on the front line of climate change, and spending time with people from other places, in other cultures. And there is a sense of joy in community. And and I think that we all deserve it, because times have been tough. So we're allowed to laugh.
Exactly. And I think, laughter and joy can fit in anywhere, even at the worst times, which is kind of why typically oppressed people have used it as a tool of survival. And things are that desperate now. So I think we're well advised to do the same.
Talking of which, Jon, your latest programme on the telly box, I actually got asked if I wanted to perhaps think about doing, and I was like, that sounds insane. No thanks. But now that I've seen it, I'm really thrilled by the fact that it's out there. And I think it's a really interesting way of talking about climate change and bringing this very specific element of the discussion into the mainstream. Can you tell us a little bit about Celebrity Trash Monsters and what's it about?
Well, it's a very highbrow, deeply scientific experiment where I encourage Kerry Katona to wear bin bags for 2 weeks. So is there a problem? I see our PhD friend with his head in his hands. I don't have a PhD. I didn't see Mark's Environment Show, and I am a white male, so can I just apologise for my existence at this point? And my entire professional background. But I did it for precisely the reason that it's not a show I probably would have done 5 years ago when I was a bit more pretentious and desiring to be seen a certain way. And I think what we're all talking about is reaching people, how you reach people and say what you want. And if the offer came in and I thought, if I don't do that, someone else is going to. And is someone else going to present that show in the way I would, which is to make sure that the emphasis stays on the root existence of the show, which is that it has to convince people to consume less. And I thought, well, I don't know if I don't want to watch it on telly and think, oh, someone else has just done loads of gags about how stupid they look wearing bin bags. So I took it and I thought, people are going to watch that who wouldn't watch a show called Jon Richardson discusses waste for an hour. So it has to be worth doing. I have to try and reach a new audience. And sure, if those people who weren't familiar with me before come and see me on tour, then great.
Yeah.
But I don't
fair
think
play.
They will.
I think it's actually super, super smart. And we've got a clip here that proves exactly that, because the conversation has many depths if you go past the fact that somebody's wearing rubbish. Let's watch it.
It wouldn't be as bad to me as like a plastic bottle of water, where it's going to be in your life for about 30 seconds, and then it's going to exist for 400 years as it breaks down.
I've never even thought about that. In fact, I wasn't even aware that it could be broken down. I didn't even think about where it went. But this is a relatively new thing, because in the old days, everything was in glass.
You're exactly right. And we've made more plastic in the last 10 years than in the 100 years before that. And most of that is ending up in oceans. The carbon footprint of the production of the plastic, then the refining and shaping of the plastic, then it coming to you and it breaking down. At every point, greenhouse gases are coming out.
So are they allowed?
It's a massive question. It's a really important question. And that's why I want you on board, because you're a campaigner. I've seen you make incredibly eloquent and passionate speeches that have changed people's views.
Well, the more I understand it, the more I may be able to do it. It's just because we don't really know.
John Barnes in bin bags.
It's incredible. I love how John Barnes is like completely up for it as well. As soon as we are given and equipped with knowledge, I think, as people, then it's like, well, absolutely. Like, I'm ready to take it on board and perhaps become an activist, I guess. Matt, I'm interested.
He did. And
yeah, go on, carry on. Go.
It's all right.
Dude.
No, I was going to say he sort of was there eventually, and I watched him on Jonathan Ross this week talk about, he's just written a book on race, and his speech on that was phenomenal, and I just thought, if he can do the same on climate as well, then it's worth doing that show. But he was resistant at the beginning because he kept saying he felt like I was attacking him, and he kept saying, "I'm not going to become one of these Tesla driving vegans." And I was like, "I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to start engaging with the topic now." And we've talked a lot about the small changes, and we as comics and making things funny are about. Some people are not engaging with this at all because they feel like we're going to take everything away from them, and we tried that and it's not working. So we have to try a new tack of being funny and congratulating people on what changes they are making, because the alternative is failing.
To be fair to Barnes, you can see why he was defensive. He was wearing bin bags. It puts you on the back foot a bit.
It's quite fantastic, really. Matt, how do you explore mentally the yin and the yang of both of your kind of roles, from having so many years of an experience of academic knowledge of climate change and then being able to come onto a stage and make people erupt with laughter? Like, how do you do that?
So it's great. So I started doing comedy a year into doing my PhD as a way to not think about climate change and get out the house at night. And then I made a point of not talking about climate change on stage for about 8 years. And then I ran out of material. And I decided, I'll just, people will say, write what you know. So I was like, I'll try and write a show about climate change. And then I realized just about, after doing it for a couple of weeks, that it was actually, people were much more interested in it because no one else was doing it. And people wanted to listen to it and wanted to learn about stuff and wanted to talk about it. I mean, the shows I'd done before, nobody came up afterwards and asked me any questions, and now every show I do, there's queues of people going like, "Oh, I want to speak to you about something." So the engagement's there, and I think comedy's a really good way of engaging people because you're entertaining them, you're not, berating them, essentially. So the more that I've done comedy about it, the more I think it's a really good tool to engage people that Jon's talking about, the people that otherwise wouldn't necessarily engage with it or would feel defensive about it. So it's really an excellent way at breaking down barriers.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask all of you, and anyone jump in here, and anyone jump in whenever you want, by the way. Does the rise of cancel culture and obviously the influx of social media and overwhelm of how people can actually get in touch with all of us now, perhaps compared to 2009, make it a little bit more of a nerve-wracking thing to discuss because we're so easily, as people with public profiles, in a position to be called out for being a hypocrite?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool, we've done that.
Yeah, move on.
Because I find that really hard. I'm a very activist person. I'm very I have a lot of empathy and I really care and I really want this world to be better for the future generation. I really, really do. Yeah. But it's sometimes quite difficult to know how to publicly express that and use my voice to full effect, particularly not having a PhD. But I am also, a minority in many sorts and on a journey that wants to be able to execute, to be able to articulate the fact that I want things to be better. Yep. But it's scary.
I have some thoughts on that. I can't see in the room if the lads wanted to.
No, on you go.
Go for it, Maeve.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I think nobody is going to get it right all the time, and that's fine. And also, I think, especially the ones on this panel, we're very lucky. We're in this position where people are listening to us. And yeah, we might get called out for mistakes that we've made, and that certainly happened to me. And if it's vicious, it's horrible, but often it's just constructive and it's fine. And, and it's helpful. It's just hard on your ego, but I think that's okay. But I do think there's some comedy to be had in that too, because one example is I left Chase Bank, right, which is Chase Bank is the biggest funder of fossil fuel companies in America. It's also really handy because it's on every corner here. And it was the only bank that would let me open an account with very limited paperwork when I first moved here. So anyway, but then I was okay, I need to leave them because I'm worried about their relationship to like the fossil fuel industry. And so then I called them, and I was recording the call for a podcast, and but it was like a call center in the Philippines, and it was just like this really nice lady. And, you know, I was all on my high horse, like ready to say to her, I'm moving my money because of your climate inaction. And, you know, and she was literally like in the Philippines quite recently, had experienced a typhoon, you know? So it's like, I think there's some comedy value in like how ludicrous we behave, sometimes trying to do the right thing. And it's fine if we look stupid, and it's fine if people give out to us on Instagram. I think the important thing is trying and learning and trying and learning, and also asking for help when we're not sure about something. I personally don't really feel powerful enough to ever get cancelled. So my career has never gotten that big. So that's lucky.
But I would also say who gets cancelled. Like, I mean, we talk about, by that I mean like a backlash you might trend on Twitter for a day, but there are men who've sexually assaulted people who are still gigging. So, do you know what I mean? I don't think we should be afraid of doing it.
Yeah, we'll get away with a plastic bag or two.
I think so, yeah.
I think what I was going to say was fairly similar to what Maeve said, basically, which is... can
you do my accent too, Mark?
Oh, I don't mean I meant to deliver it the way that you did now. I remember when I walked away from Chase Bank myself. Basically, like, a certain level of hypocrisy is almost inevitable because, you know, and I think you can let that sort of criticism wash over you a little bit. As Maeve says, it can be a little bit upsetting, but because it's been a feature of the coverage of this conference, like every climate conference, you know, immediately you get people going, oh, someone flew there. There's people there that have looked at a car recently. Yeah, this happened to Al Gore again. I'm not saying that Al Gore's record is spotless, but every time Al Gore so much as looked up a holiday on the internet, people would be like, "But I thought you said we couldn't have planes anymore." And there is this kind of almost mania for spotting hypocrisy. People every time Greta Thunberg opens her mouth, someone's like, she's got clothes on. They were made by someone. That took energy. And this culture of point scoring is needlessly weighs down the conversation. Like, all of us are aware that individually we're constantly doing things that consume energy and that we could be doing better. But like Maeve said, part of the reason for that is that as individuals we are constrained by massive machines that have kept us in place. So, you know, I feel like 10 years ago, maybe there was still time for people to say, you can't criticise people for driving. You've got, you know, all of this kind of back and forth. But basically, that doesn't matter anymore. If progress is made by this conference, for example, then I don't think it matters too much if some people here, you know, have got the wrong pair of trousers on or something. I think we probably do need to move beyond that. So if it was me and I made a point which I thought was right about, yours are fine, Matt, but you've got your PhD, of course. I feel like if I tweeted something about climate or anything else and someone said, yeah, but what about you doing this, X, Y, Z? As Maeve said, I would probably try and have the dignity to say, yeah, you're right, but I think my point is still right. And I think that about everything. Every time Gary Lineker or someone, you know, with an enormous platform makes a good political point, immediately 28 people will tweet him going, yeah, but you advertise crisps and you won't shat yourself in a match. And like you know, and if I'm Lineker, I'm saying, yes, those things are true, but my wider point is also
yes.
And that is a problem with Twitter. So much of it is about playground-style bickering. But with this being as serious as it obviously is, we sort of have to, as in, like Maeve said, you've sort of got to bury your ego a bit. If you think something's worth saying, it's worth saying even if a dozen people tweet crap back at you. I'm not saying I do that. I'm terrified of the backlash. All of us are. Yeah. But she is right. It's really only your ego, and stuff is bigger than that.
Yeah, and I think that we all have to recognise, like, people streaming this at home, people here in the audience, all of us with different platforms, different jobs, different lives, that this is very much about collective action, and any vehicle in us coming to kind of realisations collectively, and perhaps even in laughter, I think is probably worth it, rather than the energy spent, quite literally, on nitpicking about stuff that we've, frankly, in the Western world, all got really wrong for quite a long time. So we're reconditioning culture as a whole. It's a pretty hard job, and growing pains are palpable, but definitely worth it for the next generation, if not ours.
Can I just add, when you said things that we all got really wrong, which yes, But mainly it was a tiny number of people who have made millions and millions and billions and billions of pounds and dollars, you know, from creating this crisis. So yes, we are individually responsible, and, you know, as you know, our lifestyles are a bit out of control. But that didn't come from nowhere. Like, it's, you know, it's, some people still have a huge investment and huge interest in keeping this going. So to kind of, I think this comedy thing of punching up rather than punching down is useful here, right? Like, to kind of look up and see, well, like, who's still benefiting from this? Who's benefiting from denying? Who's benefiting from delaying? And let's go after them instead of like going after one another or going after people who are trying to help out.
Yes, love it. So, on that note, let's watch something else that was on the telly recently, because we are discussing whether comedy can be a vehicle to tackle something pretty huge and whether TV can do it. This is more in the realm of absurdity. I have to put a content warning out there because it might make you feel a little bit queasy. Sorry if you went out to a COP26 rave last night, but this might make you feel a bit sick. Joe Lycett talking about the head of Shell, or imitating as such. Let's have a look.
Hi, I'm Shell CEO Ben van Beurden. Here at Shell, we are powering progress. We have set out clear plans on how we are going to reduce our absolute emissions by 2030. I'm sorry, I have shut out of my mouth. Where was I? Oh yes, because we care about our planet, Shell won't invest in any new oil fields and will cancel our membership of any groups that lobby against climate change policy. This isn't greenwashing, this is the truth. Don't look at me! It's culturally cold stroking a kitten.
Hi, I'm here to distract you from the CEO of Shell shitting out of his mouth.
Make sure you get all the shit. At Shell, we're committed to showing you lots of pictures of forests and windmills so that you guys think that we're greener than we actually are. Oh yeah, that bit actually was true. Speaking of big commitments, we pledge to reach net zero emissions by 2050 and have many realistic plans as to how to achieve this. We care about our planet. We care about your future.
Wow.
Oh, it wasn't the real guy.
So that was from Joe Lycett versus the oil giant, now available to stream on all four. Wow. That's a very explicit way of putting it, and I think effective.
Straight to the point.
Stunned.
It's been a bit of a weird hour, what with that and Barnes and his bin bags.
I mean, the world is really weird.
That, I think, is what Maeve is talking about, or at least adjacent to what Maeve is talking about. It doesn't get more punching up than going after the guy from Shell.
Yeah.
How we choose to do it is, well, Joe's got his ways.
I'd like to ask each of the panel whether there's been anything that you have perhaps turned down because of political climate change or climate crisis reasons. Anything that you've been like, even though the money sounds very appealing, I just can't take that.
Yeah, I mean, I was contacted in the last year to do an educational campaign in schools for a major oil company.
Right.
Which I said no to quite quickly. I'm not allowed to name them, obviously.
But there aren't loads of oil
But there aren't that many, so, you know, just pick one. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to do, but I think, yeah, you need to be... and it's really difficult, I think, probably for comedians as well, because you kind of like then have to go into detail of like, is this company really like, is it genuine? They've got loads of stuff on their website that looks nice. And kind of what Joe's showing, you know, there's loads of pictures of nice trees and windmills and stuff. And we're at that stage where there is so much kind of greenwashing happening at the moment, because basically the social license of these companies to operate and to continue doing what they're doing are dependent upon every single one of us buying into it and saying, oh, it's fine, you can keep doing what. And so they're spending more and more money as a percentage of their advertising. They spend in, it's in my book, do buy it. I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but they're spending, quite a large percentage on carbon advertising to make themselves look green, and the amount of spending in terms of the investments that they're putting in to renewables or to carbon capture technologies are still very, very small in comparison. So, yeah, it is pretty mad. I guess I can say, you've shown stuff about Shell already. So Shell's...
To be fair, Shell wasn't very well disguised there.
No. It was quite... But so Shell were recently taken to the court in the Netherlands and told that they need to reduce their emissions by 45% by 2030 to be in line with the Paris Agreement, which they are appealing. Now, Shell's target that they set themselves was that they wouldn't have an increase in the emissions intensity of their production, I think, by 2030, which really complicated. Like, again, it's quite complicated to go into detail on this, but the emissions intensity means how much emissions there are per amount of production. So the way that I tried to describe it is like, if you could reduce the the alcohol intensity of how much you drink a week by drinking like 3 extra amounts of low alcohol beer, you're still drinking the same amount of beer. You're just adding sort of more low alcohol beer so that your overall intensity of the percentage of the beer that
you're just having a worse time.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, just to say that people need to be aware of what companies are saying out there, and there's a lot of companies saying we're going to do this thing in 30 years' time, but what they're actually saying they're going to do in the next 10 years is, not particularly great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so rather than the jobs that we're not going to do kind of in the business, what life hacks can we actually give all of us, regardless of whether we're lucky enough to be in show business? Have we come across collectively anything that is really good for us to go and tell our fams about back home? What can we do? One thing. Jon.
There's and what I would say broadly, the job of comics is to make the solutions look more fun, because that's what comedy is. Comedy is about laughing and enjoying, and we are people that when you see a comic on telly, you feel better because you think, oh, that's my friend, because we share ideas. And if we start talking about, without being overt about, I'm going to do a routine on veganism and here it is, and it's full of facts about methane emissions and slaughter, if you tell a really funny routine that happens while you're eating vegan food, you are part, I think, of selling the solution as more entertaining and more fun than the current problem we're in. But if you want advice out there, Maeve's exactly right. Get your money out of the huge banks, so you can do that tomorrow. You can bank with someone like Triodos, who are committed to not investing in fossil fuels and things like that. Mm-hmm. You can switch your energy supplier immediately. You could do it on an app in the foyer, or now while you're watching this, you could switch your energy supplier to a green supplier. That they take that's a day of admin, and they're really easy things to do. They're not remotely amusing.
Is there anyone on the comedy scene or some content that we can put on our list of what we might want to be watching as well? Is there anyone doing this incredibly? Obviously, we've played clips of some great stuff that's been on the telly, so perhaps it's your own show, but can anybody...
Yeah, the four of us.
Yeah? All of your books?
Yeah.
Actually, Lily Cole, who was featured in that Joe Lycett clip, she's got an amazing book called Who Cares Wins, again, filled with tips and advice that is very accessible. Maeve, I feel like you're a wise person for us to ask at this particular point.
I love what Jon said. I have a kind of a vaguer thing to do, which has served me very well. And that is to try and figure out my values. And so 2 of my values are be on the side of justice, and then another one is like have fun. So like generally, if you do those two things, and it does require research, because like Matt was saying, often like a company can contact you and they're like, we think you're such an awesome storyteller and we would love for you to blah, blah. And it's tempting, but then you think like, well, actually I pretty much know. And this goes for everybody. You don't have to be in show business, but I think it's like, if you just check in with yourself, like what feels right, and that could be that you're motivated by economic justice or racial justice. Essentially, they're all linked to climate justice anyway. So you won't really put a foot wrong. Or if you do, you'll get back on track easily enough. If you just try and like remember what's really important to you, that's generally going to help the community too.
I'm going to maybe hand it over to the audience. Are you up for it? Yeah? If anyone has any tips, just feel free to fly them out of your mouth, because I feel like we're all like re-educating ourselves here.
I'd just like to say, so the other thing is that it depends on how much of an influence you have or how much you consume, how wealthy you are. So, you know, the average carbon footprint of a person in the UK is about 7 tons of greenhouse gases a year, which is quite a lot. Like, you can get about, 20 kilograms on a suitcase? So that's, I don't know, a good few hundred suitcases that every one of us is throwing into the atmosphere every year. But if you're at the lower end of that scale, you know, if you're essentially just getting by day to day, your carbon footprint does not matter. You know what I mean? So people in poverty, people in, you know, that are kind of just getting by, that is not important at all for them to be doing anything about what they're eating. Or, you know, if you have to eat meat because it's cheaper, you should eat meat because it's cheaper, that sort of thing. But if you are at the higher end, if you are, you know, consuming a lot, you should look at your own lifestyle. I still don't think those people should be judged. I don't think it's good to judge anybody about anything. But if you are, you can look at yourself and then make judgments yourself. And then if you are doing positive things, you should talk about those things, because I think that's the best way to get people to, and you know, as Jon was saying, be positive about it. So it's like, oh, I'm doing this thing, and it's really been much better. You know, I haven't been on a flight for 3.5 years, and I mean, I've not missed it, and you know, it's fine. I just I took a train to Italy, and it was quite exciting.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
Amazing.
You know what I mean? So it's just kind of changing the way you talk about stuff.
I love hearing that, Matt, because I used to be really bad, because like I'm Irish and I'm female, and I grew up Catholic, so I was always like the holy trinity of self-deprecating. But now if I do anything good or even vaguely okay, like I tip the barista, I show off about it so much. And it makes me pretty annoying, but it's also, I do think it helps to make other people think, oh yeah, like doing the right thing is like not, you know, not the worst. But the other thing you said about like not judging people, that's my hobby and I can't give it up. And it's carbon neutral and I love judging people. It's
one of the thieves of joy, apparently. Judgment, comparison, and expectation.
You hear that, Maeve? You're a joy thief.
I'm a joy thief.
We've only got 12 minutes left, so I really have to hand it over to our audience who are really excited to ask these questions. Leslie says, Matt and Mark have talked about carefully ramping the comedy up or down so the climate change message isn't lost. What is the most genuinely strange or bizarre aspect of our engagement with climate change that they think authentically requires them to poke fun at?
It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think there are loads of bizarre things about the way that we engage with it. The most bizarre thing of all is that if climate change is as big a problem as all scientists agree with, then it's definitely the biggest problem that exists in humanity. But most of us don't even think about it that much. Like, the weirdest thing about it all for me is that you can go weeks without really. Well, you can't. You've got your PhD. But, an ordinary person can not engage with it for far longer than you'd think it would be possible when the world is actually on fire. But how you make that funny, I don't know. Although I like what Jon said, which is that if you can make if you can make people laugh while broadly advocating, it also ties in with what Maeve said about checking in with your values. If you can be funny about stuff while also exemplifying certain good habits, like maybe being vegan or cutting down on your use of cars or whatever it might be, then that is a sort of circuitous but still useful way of getting people to think stuff is cooler than it maybe seems. Because as Jon said, for years there's been this idea that eco-warriors, to use that pointless term, want to take stuff away from you, and it's almost the opposite. You've got to look at what can be positive and enjoyable about it. To use one, we were talking about this the other day. For years, if you saw bad comics, it probably still happens, but you remember one of the most common hack jokes used to be, any vegans in, and then no one will put their hands up, and they say, yeah, you haven't got the strength to raise your hands. And like there's been so many, the history of club comedians is about 1 in 3 of them doing that. But now you won't, you don't often see those kind of comedians around anymore, but my guess is that you couldn't do that anymore because more comedians are vegans for a start, and there's just more of a culture of people, basically collectively, we don't think anymore vegans are wretched, weak individuals who have weird milk. And that's a tiny sort of culture change within comedy, but that's the thing. One thing comedy can be harmful for is having these tropes, like fat people are like this, vegans are like this, whatever, black people drive like this, white people drive, all of these traditional staples of comedy. And one simple thing we can do as comedians is not have jokes which buy into these assumptions, which are only assumptions because everyone laughs at them, but which don't actually hold any water. I think that people will look back on the way comedians, I'm not even vegan, but the way that comedians talked about veganism for about 20 or 30 years will one day be cancelable, although as Jon said, being cancelled as a comedian just means you put your feet up for a couple of weeks. That's because of society being rotten to its core, and we've only got 8 minutes.
I would say that the gatekeepers, in terms of what is put out there on the TV, the commissioners, the people that are coming up with the concepts in terms of what we consume in the mainstream, also have a responsibility to really check in on their values and perhaps change some of the decisions being made in order for us all to kind of experiment with the weird, with the bold, with different sorts of people on the telly, etc., to be able to collectively move forward and actually work out like the bits that are funny and give us a sense of togetherness and joy.
Yeah. Lycett's thing is a brave piece of commissioning.
Yeah.
I think. I'm not sure you would have seen. You'd see there were comparable comedians 10, 20 years ago, but the sort of stuff he is doing is kind of exciting, I think, TV-wise. Because
definitely.
It genuinely is. It presents a challenge of some kind of corporations through the mainstream media, which you don't see a lot of that.
And you mentioned this kind of like idea that we can turn off from it if we're getting on with our lives because we're all quite busy. But I have a hunch that subconsciously it's making us a bit sad and a bit sick and a bit down, even if we're not right on the front line engaging with a big chat with Greta. I think that every day we kind of don't feel great when we have to use single-use plastic from the supermarket.
Yeah, like Maeve said, it's about thinking about what your actual values are and adhering to those as much as possible. And if you can combine that with being a public voice, then you probably will do some good, whether you do it directly or not.
Anonymous says, as comedians, do you think that the science is always represented or is it ignored in the search for a laugh? Anyone?
That's a great question. I mean, I think science communication is difficult, but they have really bent over backwards to make it available to us, like the scientists have. And I think comedians, whether it's just, we just don't research or I don't know, but the information is there and it's hard to talk about, but you'll find a way in always, I think. So I don't really, because what I worry is that like scientists get the blame for like not communicating properly or for knowing all this stuff and not being able to share it. And I think comics, we're communicators and we tell these stories. So I think it's fine for us to go and do a bit of research and, to use our powers for good in that way. And it doesn't have to be frightening at all. There's always a fun way in, like, and that's what we're good at. And I also think comedians are naturally, like, I'm talking about us like we're the species, you know, but like we're naturally curious. And so we can get to be the ones who ask the questions and then allow everyone to put the answers together themselves as well. And in that way we can avoid being too preachy, even though I love preaching.
Anonymous has asked this bold question, saying lots of comedians write books. Is publishing sustainable? In brackets, to Matt.
There's a fact in the book about how if you have, there's not a huge amount of scientific literature out there telling you exactly what it is, but if you have an ebook and you read more than 40 books on it, then it's more sustainable than buying those books, I think. There you go, there's a fact for you.
You're going to write 40 books?
Yeah, 40 books, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, publishing, just go to a library. There you go, that's the most sustainable thing.
Yeah, save some libraries whilst we're at it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would also say that there is something kind of mentally healthy about sitting with a book and turning some pages, look after it, pass it on, etc. But just the way that we consume information so quickly can easily like mess with us.
Books are only unsustainable if they require mass production. In other words, if they're successful, So as long as your book doesn't do well, you're fine. I think we need to point the finger at these guys like Josh Widdicombe, who loads of people buy their memoirs. We need to go to the top here. Me and Matt are fine.
Yeah.
What emits more carbon? A comedian at the O2 with their name written in about 50 footlights, or Lady Gaga performing a full concert at the same arena with 50 dancers?
I'd imagine Lady Gaga. Comedians are quite low carb, like you're just by yourself. If you can just cycle everywhere.
Yeah,
our production values are too low for us to be a real menace.
Exactly. we don't have backing dancers. It's not all of us. Yeah.
But it's one of those points that we've sort of spoken about a lot, and the questions are quite interesting because they lead to this: should we not have publishing anymore, and should we not have this kind of gig? And what world do you want to live in? This is all about trying to save the planet. And if what you're saying to people from the outset is you can't go and watch a music gig, you can't watch a comedian, you can't buy a book, nobody's going to give a shit. Nobody's going to join the fight. So what you've got to say is, how do we have Lady Gaga? I don't want to live without Lady Gaga, for Christ's sake. What's the point? But you know, how do we have those concerts?
We can cycle whilst we watch her.
Exactly.
We can simply seize the assets of the fossil fuel industry and nationalise them. And then we can go.
There was such a beautiful smile, just like.
It's how to get you.
Who is responsible? We've got 2 minutes. Someone's got to talk at the speed of Dizzy Rascal on this. Who is responsible for diversifying comedy as a field? Who?
All of us.
Comedians?
Yeah,
commissioners?
all of us.
Every single person,
Yeah, and in different ways. Like commissioners, the gatekeepers, you said, need to look at diversity, but then as comedians, we can decline gigs which are, insufficiently diverse. A lot of comedians have started asking to see the lineups and turning down gigs if it's going to be all white men or that kind of thing. So we do all have a part to play in it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Agreed. Okay, quickly tell us where we can see your latest thing, your latest book, hear your latest podcast. Maeve, take it away.
I'd love for you to listen to Mothers of Invention, where I am only in 5% of it, and everybody else is women who are on the forefront of climate action and fighting for climate justice. And thank you for today.
Oh, thank you. Amazing.
I'm a big fan of Maeve's podcasts from a geeky climate perspective. So
we haven't got time for fangirling. John.
Listen to Maeve's podcast. That's all I would say.
Matt.
Yeah, listen to Maeve's podcast. And buy my book out next week. Out next week. You can buy it anywhere. Audible.
What's it called again?
It's called Hot Mess.
Hot Mess. Don't buy it from Amazon. Get it from somewhere else. Please, Mark.
Maeve's podcast, really.
Yeah.
And actually, even worse, I've read Matt's book and it's really good. So I recommend everything. But in terms of where you can see me, I'm going to call your bluff. I'm in Glasgow in like 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
So that's where you can see me, down the road.
That's so exciting.
But don't buy my book about the environment from like 12 years ago, because the conversation has moved on so far from there that it embarrasses me that it exists. Some of my books are good. Like, by all means, read a novel of mine, but that book was basically...
I read it when I was doing research for my first show, and it was, you were a trailblazer.
I think at the time it was worth doing, but I don't think
yeah, don't read it now.
It's not 2008 anymore. No, I've got other books which are good. There we go. Good.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to you guys watching at home and streaming it on your devices, etc. You guys in the audience, all of the channels that have come together, the top dogs, so that this conversation can be had. I think it's very important. It makes me feel excited and feel like there perhaps is a hopeful, progressive sort of thing that's happening even in the mainstream. A book that has just come out that wasn't written by me or any of us is called Consumed by Arja Baba, and talking about colonialism and consumerism as well, which is another great resource. Mothers of Invention, make sure that we are listening to that. I've been Gemma Cairney. Follow me on Instagram and all the rest of it, because I'm still here doing lots of this. And thank you.
Bang on time, look at that. Well done.